Collier.
Hi, hey.
Hi. Hi. Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
So, just because I'm the one that roped you into this, I'll prepare us as the moderator, because it's on the occasion of the publication of your book, The Shabbiness of Beauty, by our common publisher, Mac Books. And when I got the notice about the book, I had literally been talking about Peter Hujar's work. And so I sort of thought, God, I haven't talked to you in so long about photography. Let's just do a non-master class in public. So I have a million questions, and we've, of course, done already two of these talks every time we practice. But can you tell people a little bit about the evolution of the book?
Sure. So it started with an invitation from Gallery Buchholz to curate a show of Hujar's work. And at first it was kind of fluid, like it could have been a group show, but then it just sort of became clear that it should be a conversation between Peter Hujar and myself. And so I had many photographs going back to the early 80s that I felt could be part of that conversation. And then I started to actively channel Hujar in making animal horses and animal photographs, in particular photographs of horses, because I love all of his photography, but I was always really struck by the way he photographed animals. It was just so unique, so like no one else. And so I spent, I don't know, like a summer, longer than a summer, photographing horses at a farm near where I am here in Sullivan County, and thinking of Hujar's many photographs of animals. And as I was doing it, realizing just how unbelievably difficult it is, and realizing way too late that I also was using the wrong shutter speed. It should have been faster, and or because they just move all the time. And so yeah, it's I just read somewhere, I forgot who said it, but like something like, like really loving someone's work is learning from it in a way. And that's what I felt was happening as I was trying to take these photographs of horses, many of them covered in flies, in the like 95 degrees weather in August. I felt, well, I was learning about horse behavior as I was doing it, and I was learning from Hujar. Seeing my mistakes, I was learning from Hujar.
I had a very similar experience in Germany in the mid-90s. There was a kind of pasture up a mountain, and there were 5 white horses that were always there. And I would pass by in the car, and I just kind of I assumed that the perfect picture lay there. And I shot it with a 4x5 camera from the bottom of the hill, which, is essentially ridiculous. And when I got the film back in New York, once I came back, literally the horses were laughing. Because they knew, and we're like, fuck you. And I chased, horse pictures, and I think because of Hujar, seeing them, and found it incredibly difficult. But it reminds me of something that you wrote, or it's in the essay by the executor of the estate about Dan Arbus and her saying that Hujar was derivative. And I was really thinking about it this morning, about how I only know what it's like to be a photographer. So this can work in, painting in all forms, but we're born into a culture of bodies, and so no one invents a body, and then we see bodies outside of our own in images, And we kind of follow that path. And so we always take from other photographers. Photography loves photography, and no one is supposed to invent it. You know, we simply, and there's such a world of difference between Hujar and so many other people. And then of course there's crisscross, and I think those crisscrosses are what allows a kind of project that you're talking about, that that it's completely reasonable to look at older work and want to respond and want to make work. And I wanted to start with this question. I read your beautiful passage about looking for a close-up of the teeny baby that Hujar photographed, and you wrote, "I knew I wanted the close-up of the teeny baby latched onto his mother's breast." And I was thinking that your book, for the most part, focuses on animals, nature, and women. You know, there's a bit of masculinity, but it's not the breadth of masculinity that probably most gay men would do the edit. And I wanted to know what you see as your relationship to the gay male artist.
Wow, what a fantastic question. That you know how to get to the heart of things. That's been on my mind so much for such a long time, because yeah, I've been drawn to, to so many gay male artists, like Jean Genet, and I made that video Notes on Blue, which is kind of channeling Derek Jarman, and I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And recently I wrote to you and to Liv that I was totally engrossed in this book that Alan Frame just made called Fever, which is this moment in 1981 where he's photographing all of his friends who are mostly gay men, and there are some women who might be gay, I don't know. But it's a very, very good question. And I feel, what can I say? There's something there. There's some kind of sympathy, but I'm not a deep thinker. I don't probe myself about these things. I think about these questions,
but it's funny because someone recently in the last couple of months turned me on to Blue, and I watched it, and it was, my attention span is so dysfunctional at this point, but I was able to watch the whole thing, and I just started taking notes, just written notes, to kind of accumulate what are the things that like punctured me, and what would that look like taken out of his space. And what I was thinking about is that what I think the answer to my question is we don't have so much free will to choose our icons, because really it's what we're fed. And part of and not to say that gay men aren't amazing artists, because clearly they are, but why I had been thinking about Hujar before you and I first talked was that I've been in the studio again making studio portraits, which I haven't done in a long time, and I'm really making more than I ever have in my whole life, probably. And I was and I was thinking that part of it was not a response to work like Hujar and Mapplethorpe, or even George Platt-Lyons, or a million other guys, but it was, how do we make sure that we infiltrate the system of distribution so that other images flow? Because I think that we received a very edited, group of images when we were younger. And it was, straight men, and it was gay men. And yes, you and I are part of kind of the postmodern reworking of the art world. So we certainly had female thinker artists coming into, our realm, but we may think like Mary Kelly, but we don't necessarily see like Mary Kelly. And so I think, there's been a lot of women who have their aesthetics kind of educated by gay male history, because it is so creative and they are so good at keeping it alive.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And what you were saying in the very beginning about bodies and this and wanting to look at bodies is just like an incredibly natural desire and drive, and it this to not just not I'm not talking just about naked bodies, even though yes, we love to look at naked bodies, I think, but we like to look at people in general. And I've quoted him before, but Degas said, we're made to look at each other. And I think he was riding a trolley or something. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think what I was fed, or, it was mostly straight white male photographers, except for Diane Arbus. I think she was.
I don't even know what would we do without her. The idea that we wouldn't have Diane Arbus, we barely got Judy Dater. There were so few.
Yeah.
And then, really, I was also reminded when you wrote in your essay that our generation came of age in postmodern art world, and as photographers, in a sense, it was the best of times and the worst of times. Imagery was the subject and the locus of all of this kind of possibility of activism and protest, but it was also forbidden in so many ways, be it just being, making traditional black and white photography and also representing women. And so for me, of course, after I appropriated, I moved on to just objectifying, boys, and not doing it really with a kind of conscious, I want to make an object, but saying I want to explore the connection between the camera and a body and a subject and a fantasy and a stranger. But I have to do it with boys because it's forbidden to do it with women. And it wasn't until, the end of the 90s that I would take a picture of a woman and show it. And I think about, and we talked about this yesterday, how Me Too is very much an echo for us of the kind of PC movement. And so there was a time when I couldn't take pictures of women, and essentially there's a time now when I revisit those questions, and they're really applicable, especially since pictures go so much further out into the world than they do. But
I remember reading that you were quoted somewhere. I remember reading that, that you had said that, like in the 90s, we weren't supposed to photograph women. And I think by that time, you were photographed, and I was very familiar with lots of photographs of women that you had made. And when I read that comment, I thought, man, she's really got chutzpah and guts. And you were saying it in such a kind of ironic way. We weren't supposed to photograph women. Like how stupid was that? And I always felt like I was the one like obediently following the rule, and you were the one who was not following the rule because you knew it was a stupid rule, and you were just doing, you were doing it anyhow.
Well, it's the difference between our personalities, and people should know who are watching that we lived in the same building for years, just 2 blocks from where I am right now, where I still have my studio. And so we were, we had this kind of beautiful type of relationship where we were 2 artists in essentially an artist building, and we would talk about photography. But at that point, I don't even know if I was really taking too many pictures, but it wasn't, it sounds very much like me. Oh, we weren't allowed to. And, and I listened, but then I felt, you know, essentially I felt repressed. And I think the difference was, you know, one difference, it's not about brave and not brave. It's about kind of gay straight stuff. Because for me, you know, I was so, and I've said this a million times, but I was so in love with Barbara Kruger and Laurie and Sarah Charlesworth and, you know, all these, Mary Kelly, Louise Lasser, all these, Louise, yeah,
Lawler.
all these people, and they were all straight. And because they were straight, their feminism was completely hinged on their relationship to men. And I didn't have that. You know, I might be oppressed by the patriarchy, but I didn't have to sleep with it, and I didn't have to cram myself into, you know, any kind of situation to be with them. So for me, not photographing women was making me complicit in not dealing with female desire for women. Yeah. And so I had to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Terrified.
You were terrified.
Oh my God, I was terrified because A, it was illegal. And I mean, it really felt that way. You know, I might as well have been like, you know, in a Jewish ghetto smuggling pork or something. I mean, it was really a bit frowned upon, and to be erotic and to look with desire. And I think when I look at Hujar's work, I see the total freedom of someone who is allowed to look. And also I was thinking about how there's not that many young boys in his work. And I'm convinced it's because he was getting laid. I'm convinced it was because he was having a ton of sex. And so he didn't have to objectify young kids who he could sort of peruse, like some other gay male photographers. And I think that the reason that his work is so poignant and potent is because it feels very like alive. And now it doesn't feel like the work of repression.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it totally retains all of that. Decades later, like more than half a century later, those portraits are just still as vibrant and edgy and potent, like you said, as ever. Yeah. You started to tell me before that well, first of all, when did you actually start photographing girls again? Do you remember, like the
Yeah, it was, I mean, I was photographing that young, my ex-German girlfriend's niece, who was 14, 15. I was photographing her in the, you know, early mid-90s all the way through 2000.
That's very early in terms of the rule.
But I kind of related, she was wearing a binder. So it was both very early for a binder and very early for a kind of trans character. But she didn't count to me because she was 14, 15. She had a shaved head. You know, she was usually dressed as a boy. The whole point was that she was like acting like a boy. But when I was working on Jens F., towards the end of that project, so that was the, you know, similar project to you in a way. I went to Andrew Wyeth, and my thing was like I was going to make every one of those drawings and paintings of Helga with this boy in Germany as a photograph. So I was going to study kind of classical painting and poses and female posture using a boy, and I did it for years and years. And what happened is I started erasing the femininity of the project, of the original Helga, because I was covering all of Wyeth's work with my pictures of this boy. And I was getting bored because I completely proved that, especially a straight boy only has like 4 moves. He only has like 3 expressions. And after years, I literally couldn't catch all the expressions of Helga. And at that time, I met a woman, an artist named Kate Cunningham, who looked exactly like Helga at SBA in a darkroom. And I just flat out asked her if she would pose naked for me as Helga from Wyeth. And luckily, she was really excited about Wyeth and Helga also, and she must have known that she looked just like Helga, and she said yes. And she had never posed naked, and I had never taken a picture of a naked woman, not even a lover, fully naked. And it was terrifying in its planning. And then it was, you know, like head exploding for both of us, because we were outside in a in a backyard, and it really felt like, you know, Eve and Eve. Like, it really felt natural and unshy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it took me a long time to have that experience again. And I would say that, you know, it really took till now. And working with someone I'm intimate with, to find that sense of permission.
Yeah.
Because I think permission is just the one thing I dragged from the art world to fashion was permission. And the idea that in fashion I was safe because I was granted permission by an apparatus bigger than myself.
Yeah.
And what about for you? Like, because I didn't even realize that you made those kinds of traditional, beautiful black and white photos. I don't know where my head was, but how has that been part of your practice?
I mean, that's what I was doing in the mid 80s. Well, I mean, from the very beginning, first in 35, and then in the mid 80s in 2 1/4, my sisters and my friends. And then I read the Craig Owens essay, Feminists and Postmodernism. And I realized what a terrible mistake I had made for, and well, actually, no, I remember I read that in 1982. And I went on to make photographs in 1984 that were still of women, but I thought I was doing it in a way where I was showing women as powerful, even though that was supposed to be impossible as well. You just couldn't do it at all. So it took me a little while to learn the lesson, and finally I learned the lesson, and I stopped completely for about, like, photographing people, not just women, but people, for like 15 years, actually. And then I started doing the 4x5 portraits again, just very recently, actually, of and more 2 1/4 portraits, where those started because I went to my sister's wedding, and my nieces and nephews were there, and I got the idea to kind of photograph the next generation because I had done all these portraits of my sisters. And I actually photographed them in the same place where I had photographed my sisters in 1980 on the back porch of my mother's tiny little house in Montreal. So, you know, but, you know, the whole question of permission. So I was kind of given permission in a way to do all of this because I had these invitations. I had an invitation from the Walker Arts Center to, you know, pick a German film and make a work in response to it. I had an invitation from MUMOC in Vienna to make a work, and so I ended up focusing on Genet. When I made those portraits of my nieces and nephews, I was invited to be in Documenta. So, like, you get these, like you say, like an institution comes along and says, we want you to do something. And you feel like you're granted this permission.
It's so interesting because I had Craig as a teacher in 1982, and for me Craig and Carol Squires, the photo critic, were sort of the top the top thinkers that I was close to studying with. SVA was great then. We had so many great teachers. But, when you talk about it and I talk about it, it makes me feel like I was closeted, and, as in I can't have the thing that I desire. I can't do the thing that I desire because all this work is being done all this new work is being made. And I have to say, it wasn't until I realized, like, I turned my gaze and thought, holy shit, like, you know, Nan Golden is doing all this stuff down the block with people I know, and has been doing it because she didn't read the Craig Owens essay. I think, you know, the way that I looked at Nan or Mark Morris Row was in the way like some kid that goes to a magazine store and sees a gay magazine hidden and realizes, oh, there's this whole other world. But I think had I not been restricted in the 80s, had I not been told to look at this very carefully so that I could even understand that, you know, a seductive woman image in a Helmut Newton picture functions differently for a lesbian, and maybe functions differently for a woman that doesn't think she'll ever look like that. So for me, there was no false advertising. I knew that that wasn't achievable for me. So I was freed from having to measure up. Yeah. You know, the next step was like, could I sleep with her? And, you know, that became an adventure. But, and of course, a person is not a picture. But I do find it really poignant that we both felt unable to make certain kinds of work that is at the foundation of photography.
Yeah, yeah, and it was like, it was this prohibition that lasted for so long, and you know, Victor Bergen was kind of like this, you know, this guy who, you know, made the rules, and everybody was dutifully following along, and there was so much boring photography and boring filmmaking that got made as a result of that. Yeah, that prohibition. It's funny you should mention Nan Golden, because when I went to San Diego in '85, and when I left in '88 to go to New York to live, where I had only visited, and I right at that moment I bought two books. I bought The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, and I bought Tulsa by Larry Clark, and I idolized those books, and frankly, to this day, I still worship those books. They're absolutely incredible, and I poured over Net, you know, The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, and I was like imagining myself moving to New York, and, you know, kind of living this life, and that's another reason why this Alan Frame book that I can't stop talking about, that it's like the hidden, you know, it's the film from that moment, from 1981, that never got developed. And, you know, and suddenly it's like he found the film and he developed it and he made the book, and we're getting like this like second, you know, look on all like many of the same people who are in the ballad, but from a completely different perspective, from the eyes of Alan Frame, the sensibility of Alan Frame. And it's an incredibly poignant book, and it for me, it brings back all of the, you know, the memories of, well, for me, it was a later moment. It was like 1988 that I got The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, but yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it's nostalgic. You could say whatever you want. It's evokes a lot of feeling, and
I think that nostalgia, I don't know, people say things about nostalgia that, you know, it blocks the present, or and in photography, you know, it's a common joke to say, take a picture and put it in a drawer, and in 25 years it's going to be good, just because it has the passage of time. And
it has that Chevy or that Mustang or whatever. Yeah.
That is Stephen Short. when Stephen Schorr was making his pictures, and I was working at Light Gallery in, I don't know, 83, 84, I just thought they were the most boring pictures in the world. They were just of yesterday. And for me, they carried, I had no nostalgia about the middle of the country. I had no nostalgia about road trips. And of course, now you look at them and they're old cars and those streets don't exist. And it's the same with people. And it reminds me that, you know, I remember Nan doing the, you know, slideshow at the Saint with Marvin Heiferman of it. And seeing pictures of people that I would hang out with maybe 3 years later. So at some point, I was living with Edwige, who was in a couple of pictures, and I was friends with Rissa, who dated French Chris, and I was living in a junkie's apartment, and I was watching a junkie shoot up, you know, every day, and sleeping next to her, and watching her perform at Nell's and whatever other clubs. But I didn't take pictures then. I mean, I have snapshots of us getting ready to go out or being depressed or, you know, whatever. But it didn't even occur to me to make the pictures that I could have made because I felt it was so wrong. And the funny thing is, I kind of still think it's wrong. Like, I still think it's wrong to take pictures of junkies. That's just me, because it's so ingrained in me that documentary photography is not documentary and that it's kind of predatory. And, you know, and I have no idea who I would be today if I was taking those pictures. You know, I would be a different person. And there's a part of me that is nostalgic just for the idea that I could have made these pictures, but then I think, but they already exist. Someone already took them, and that was what was kind of fed to us in a way, like all the pictures exist.
You were making those incredible works about gender. I remember, like the dresses, like the girls' frilly dresses that were like
Cast in plaster.
What?
They were cast in plaster.
They were plaster, and then you would write things like underneath, like, so if you were like looking up the little girl's skirt, and it would say, "Have you been a boy? Have you been a boy?" Like, I thought that those were amazing. I always remember those. Have you been a girl? Have you been a boy? You know, like riffing on this. Have you been a good boy? But instead, it's like, have you been a boy? Have you been a girl? And yeah, those were. I think you did a whole show of those.
I did a whole show because I made one for a group show, and I was so embarrassed to bring it to the gallery because I thought it was just the stupidest thing. And then people liked it. So then, yeah, I lived for 6 months up these skirts, up these dresses, writing as much kind of crazy, gender dysmorphic, angry screeds to basically, I mean, in those days, I made work to either seduce or punish people that visited the gallery. That's all I was interested in. I wanted to make work that turned people on to women and to talk dirty in front of people. And I wanted to punish people that I felt had created an oppressive culture and a culture in which I had no exposure to lesbian role models. You know, so like I was so angry. And it was photography, I think, that really freed me from that, because it wasn't metaphoric. It wasn't, you know, it was what you looked at. And that's what I love about photography, that it's not that it tells the truth, but it is what happened on that day. I think.
Yeah.
You were talking about the frames, and I was wondering I think on your pictures there's a black bar at the bottom. How did that come about?
I mean, that was so that was, it was a device. It wasn't, it was like, it was a conceptual device, but honestly, it wasn't thought through very well. And I did use, I mean, on some of the images, I used it to have text running along the bottom of the image. And I did like one series or a couple of series with text. So it was, yeah, it was like a place where you could put text below the image. And I did one series of my sister Kate, and it was something, I think I don't even know, it might have been T.S. Eliot, I don't remember, but it was something like, she entered now without scruple. I can't even remember the last part of it actually, but it was my sister Kate naked. You know, she's the one who's very muscled in the book. She was working out a lot, and so yeah, I mean, it was good for text, but otherwise it was just kind of like an aesthetic thing.
Do you think that we were trained to, it's funny because, you know, photo and text and appropriation stuff always was aestheticized. There always was an aesthetic. Mm-hmm. But I think my experience of being an artist in the early days, and of course I was an accidental artist. I studied journalism. So I just, you know, kind of chimed in at like the moment in which you could with no skills because it was appropriation. But I think there's a real, it's as though we shy away from claiming that we just like the way something looks. Mm-hmm. Like we're not allowed to we're the not allowed to generation. And so we're not allowed to say, well, I did this because I like the way it looked. And all of my early collage stuff that came from Yensef was really made to cover up the existing Wyeth material because I couldn't publish the book if I was already in danger of a lawsuit, but I couldn't really get away with it unless I covered enough of the existing material. And before I thought about publishing it, I was just putting contact sheets in as a log for myself because I had to wait a full year to go back to Germany. So none of it, or at least 75% of it, is done without any aesthetic thought. It might be instinct, but I didn't say, oh, this looks good.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first showed them at the biennial, someone said to me, wow, didn't you feel like it took a lot of nerve to do something so artsy craftsy? And I was kind of, you know, I had to immediately say, well, you know, it's not artsy craftsy because it was just done without thinking people would look at it. And now I kind of realize, God, I'm free to kind of embrace all aesthetic ideas, and something being beautiful is okay. It's not always enough, but it's part of pleasure. And I think our education in a way put a hold on pleasure in place of something else that was important.
Yeah, it was considered frivolous, I think, to make an image that was just like about pleasure or beauty or and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, honestly.
Well, I think that's why we're attracted to gay male work, because I think that it circumvented that and it had sex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and writers also, like some of my favorite writers, like Hervé Guibert is, you know, gay, and
a photographer,
and an incredible photographer. Yeah, he kind of the best in both worlds.
Yeah, so I think that's why, you know, in the work that I'm making now, it's really, I'm really trying to understand like how the camera focuses as, you know, both a vagina and a penis, and how the female body can kind of present itself as powerful and dominant, or pliable and enterable, but within a conversation. And it's complex because it's also not just me, you know. It's working with other people who are artists and have ideas about this. And I really focus, and I had a conversation with Angel Zinoviev, who's in a lot of the pictures that I've been making, about the Hujar picture from your book of the cock in hand. And we were looking at it, and we were talking about what that does, how that activates something in us, being kind of told in a way that we never had the thing to hold. And that how can we hold our bodies and present our bodies as a shape, as a thing, so that our sex in a way can exist separate from our body and our brain, because we don't really have that. And it's a great, you know, it was just another way in which I circle back to what you've been investigating and the beauty of this kind of dialogue, you know, which I think is our responsibility to kind of put out into the world. So more artists, you know, like for me, what would be so magical is for gay male artists to, you know, listen to this conversation and think about their bodies in a different way. And, you know, perhaps, I mean, I'm sure it's presumptuous to think that they're not, but I know how I was with blinders, you know, for a long time. And it kind of takes conversation and actually being pushed out of a comfort zone. You know, also I think working with someone, because Angel is not 20, you know, working with a body that is in some ways just more mature. And what that really means is someone who's walked around in a body for enough years that they have a lot of history in terms of how it's received. And I think that, you know, I really, when I'm looking at Hujar and Mapplethorpe particularly, I'm wondering how much exchange there was in that idea that who you're photographing has a narrative and is therefore, you know, partly an author, or can be.
I think what, you know, Hujar apparently didn't direct he just waited, and when they started doing something that he liked, he would take pictures, and he would shoot a lot of film, just waiting for that moment to happen without ever saying very much, without ever asking for anything. That's what I've heard and read about him.
It's so beautiful to know. Also, the people that he was shooting, you know, might be inclined to do a few things. I'm not a big talker myself. I think people expect me to because I talk so much. But in the studio, the formality of a person being a certain distance from you, sometimes it feels like I'm on the shore and they're in the water someplace and they can't hear me, and so I count on them to do something, and I ask them to count on me that something will come. I remember I interviewed Fran Lebowitz a couple of years ago, and that beautiful picture of Fran in the bedroom with wallpaper, you know, with just a sheet on, he was sleeping over her parents' house, and just...
Who's he? Who did she photograph?
Peter Hujar photographed Fran Lebowitz.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that classic picture where she's really young and she's in bed.
Yeah.
And that was just a sleepover at her parents' house. And he, you know, kind of walked into the room and got that picture, which is then, I think about that picture, you know, an essay could be written about that picture versus Sontag on the bed, you know, with the turtleneck, completely in control, completely iconic. And you've got the, you know, the sensual undressed, of the moment, really gay Fran Lebowitz. And then you've got the closeted, uptight, you know, trying to be kind of the American philosopher du jour. And Hujar just existed. You know, it's the same thing as Kids in Italy and Horses. The distance between those two women who were in the same world but so different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm still really shy when I photograph people in my studio, my minuscule studio. It's just a room in my apartment, and the last portraits that I did were 4x5, which, I don't know, maybe you've become really adept at it. I never did it enough to feel totally at ease with it.
No, I mean, I dragged it around Germany, and I think there's still like hay in that camera. And I was just talking about actually taking it out and cleaning it and seeing. I still have some of that, you know, that what is it called? The black and white Polaroid negative film packs.
Oh yeah,
Which I'm sure they're dry as shit, but I was talking with Angel about the quickness versus the slowness, and most of the time when I'm shooting them, I use a Leica digital camera, and so it's slow. And I was sort of explaining that there's such a difference in me going like this to find it versus this. And when we discussed that slowness, I said, well, you know, if we want to go even slower, get out that 4x5, and it's, you know, it's one shot, and then you wait and you pull it and you see if it's in focus. You know, that's my memory of 4x5. It's sort of like you can get such a great thing when it all works.
yeah.
And you expect it. I remember once actually shooting Jodie Foster with an 8x10 and assuming that because it was 8x10 it would be magical. And they're just the worst pictures because they actually capture every bit of discomfort until we kind of got in a rhythm. So I think 4x5 is kind of, the beauty of it is that there's potentially beauty, but I don't know that perfecting it makes a better picture, because we all know those like photo nerds that really know how to use a 4x5. Yeah,
It's the light. The light is so much.
it's the light.
Picture, yeah.
Yeah, which is why, you know, sometimes it's so funny because when I'm doing commercial portraits, sometimes I get really frustrated with my assistants, and I'll show them a picture that I've taken alone in my, you know, my house, and I'll say, I took this alone. I just took it with this one light, and I bounced it off the ceiling, and, you know, why can't we do this? And, you know, I'm surrounded by like 10 lights in a giant studio, and but at the same time, when I'm in my studio now, sometimes I just think, oh, how do I do this again? You know, how do I sort of relax enough, become limber enough to accept the light that exists and embrace the picture? Because it's always this kind of chasing of a magical light.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I haven't even made any photos for a while. I've been mostly shooting video.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on a new video that I started like almost 2 years ago. I started writing it almost 2 years ago about these dance parties. Did you ever go to the Loft party in New York, the Mancuso?
How old do you think I am?
Well, it's still going on, Collier.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's like they had their 50th anniversary.
Holy shit.
And I only started going because a really good friend, you know, introduced me and started inviting Jason and I. You need to be invited by a member. So I just started writing about those parties, and then in March of 2020, you know, everything, the last party had been the month before it was Valentine's Day, and that was the 50th anniversary party. Everything ground to a complete halt, you know, as we all know. And then I transitioned into another realm, another subject of writing that's kind of, you know, it's actually the life in Riverside Park during COVID, when all the bodies just like moved to Riverside Park to do everything that they usually do in private during COVID. So anyhow, that's what this new video is about.
So when did the loft parties start again?
1970.
No, when did they start again?
We don't know. It's like nobody, I don't know if anybody knows really. Like when we have herd immunity, I don't know.
Yeah, we just have to get everyone vaccinated, so party. But it sounds like there's an interesting juxtaposition between those two projects, because it's, you know, one is everyone coming in to be together, and one is everyone having to be outside to be with anybody.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you, what are you working on?
Well, I've just, you know, I was working on this ballet project, and then it kind of also went a bit quiet, because dancing with other people, now everyone's vaccinated. I think all my dancers, people I dance with, are vaccinated. So I've been working on that, and just taking pictures in the simplest way. I think it's funny how when you take time away from a practice and then you go back to it with just such a different set of ideas and people. You know, the subjects change, and the time period changes. When I think about taking pictures in Germany of this kid who was, you know, wearing 3 bodysuits to keep her breasts down and dating the girl across the street, and they would go out and people would think that my niece was just a guy. And I knew that I was talking about who I might have been, you know, if I had been 13 in that year and had a gay aunt. And now just to kind of see that, you know, as a mainstream subject, and just like something that comes into my life all the time, and just the way in which, you know, trying to kind of navigate like how to deal with being born female in this time, and how to kind of like keep your history and embrace yourself, and but also assert like as much control and freedom as you want. So to me, I feel like what I'm doing is having like a very extended conversation about gender, which is something that I felt like I was in conversation by myself a long time ago. And it's really, it's eye-opening how, because people make a lot of assumptions about me and, you know, how I present and who I am. And that, you know, it's almost as though you can be a curveball and just change, or you can simply power through and hold on to sort of certain identity things. And how is Jason? Can I just ask?
Yeah, he's very well. He taught at CUNY. He taught 16mm filmmaking on Zoom, to like an intro class to filmmaking, you know, with Bolex cameras. So, you know, mid-pandemic, he got special permission to go on campus 3 times so that his students could load film and shoot film and then have it digitized and have something to edit. Yeah, it was an incredible feat. He did 2 semesters of online teaching. And now he's now the semester is over, and but it was pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, crazy stories about teaching on Zoom, and I won't miss it. I would rather, commute than look at art in a small box.
Yeah, I'll be happy to get back to that also for sure. Um,
So I guess it's an hour that we've been talking.
yeah, Collier, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to wrap it up.
Maybe we'll just continue this over a coffee.
I hope so. I really do. And yeah, you're based in New York, and I'm going back and forth, so we should definitely do that. I would love
And,
that.
and thanks to Michael Mack for getting us together.
Yes, and yeah, and to live for.
And let's just show the book.
Yeah, and where's
How beautiful.
your book is in the other room, but
Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
okay.
Everyone go get this book. Okay. Bye.
Okay, bye. Bye.